A very happy new year to Kemi Badenoch, leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition. The festivities are over and important resolutions have surely been made. Now is the year of reckoning for Badenoch and perhaps for her party too. Badenoch has been the leader of the Conservative Party for a matter of 2 months, but only her most ardent fans would say that she has met all of her targets. The media and political jury is still out. The critics have Badenoch in their sights, so here's some well-meaning advice to help the Tory leader make 2025 a year to remember for all the right reasons. For a start, Badenoch has to get out more. Making a splash at Westminster is obviously important to Badenoch, especially as she didn't command the support of the majority of her fellow Tory MPs in the leadership election. But this is inside baseball politics. Kemi should also be seeking to make chemistry with the voters too. It's all well and good having a rural walkabout with the likes of Jeremy Clarkson, but the North West Essex MP should also be grinning and gripping with ordinary people. She's a new broom and needs to show a different style. And on that Clarkson photo op, the TV host is gammon man personified, and Badenoch's handlers needed to make sure that the Conservative leader was sitting down when in the company of a tall man, who gives the impression that he has no trouble at all looking down on others who are not like him. Having someone in-house who understands social media would also be a great help. The Conservative website is terrible and Badenoch's young fogey style won't do at all. Nigel Farage has perfected his used car dealer cosplay. The public needs to see Badenoch more. We need to get comfortable with her, and she needs us to like her better. Social media would offer the opposition leader a means of achieving all 3 goals. The number 1 priority for Badenoch, however, is to find a way to step out of Nigel Farage's shadow. Even during the holidays, the Reform leader claimed the spotlight by breathlessly telling the world that his party's membership now exceeds that of the Conservatives. The youngest political party in British politics has just overtaken the oldest political party in the world. Reform UK are now the real opposition. It was a nice line from Farage, which allowed him to offer once again his favourite 3-line pitch of 2024. The Tories are in terminal decline. The Reform Party is in place to replace the Conservative Party as the natural home for moderate and right-of-centre voters. The 4 million votes won at the last general election are just the beginning of the political revolt that will transform the United Kingdom. The luminaries of the hard-right social media universe repeat this message at every opportunity, with GB News acting as Farage's faithful amplifier. Badenoch's reply was pure Kemi. She accused Reform of cooking the figures, said that her leadership of the Tories had attracted a surge in new members too, and was said to have demanded that GB News give Farage less air time. The Reform Party leader, eyeing the next day's media headlines, was not to be denied and hit back strongly. Farage declared that Badenoch was bitter, upset and angry that Reform was now the 2nd biggest party in British politics. He then punched his Tory rival in the political solar plexus. The Conservative brand is dying under your leadership, he told Badenoch on X. However, this is not an excuse to accuse us of committing fraud. Yet again, Farage was the clear winner of this particular political spat. The Farage Factor has loomed large over Badenoch ever since her election as leader of the Conservatives. Nigel Farage positions himself as Britain's change candidate, the real alternative to Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer. It would be political suicide for Badenoch to let this go unchallenged, but so far, she has been less than convincing when explaining why the anti-Labour government mood of the country should find its home at Conservative HQ. The Tories could have chosen a Farage-like candidate last October, but rejected Robert Jenrick. Badenoch must hope that party leaders and members hold their nerve and recognise that the next election will be won from the centre and not from the fringe. But she shouldn't take this for granted. In the meantime, with the media bored and in need of a crisis to energise interest in its output, Badenoch needs a canny strategy that can suffocate the political force of Farage's anti-migration policy. She also needs a persuasive message that connects with Conservative and Reform voters. Patronising remarks that suggest Farage is a chancer and Reform is nothing but a protest vote would not go down well with the media, nor with voters. Attacking Reform's lack of a serious economic policy is political due diligence, but it might not dent the party's buoyant opinion poll ratings in the near future. Badenoch surely recognizes that reform has just one policy. Like the National Front of the 1970s, reform wants Britain's national conversation to be about immigration numbers and nothing else. The more the nation obsesses about the black and brown people on the country's soil, the better reform will do at the polls. To this end, Nigel Farage has been able to mobilize the entire legacy media and social media universe. For example, Matt Goodwin, the Tommy Robinson in a tie-hard right intellectual, talks of nothing else and hails Farage as Britain's only saviour. GB News and Talk TV join the Amen chorus, with mainstream media quickly following suit. Does immigration deserve this amount of political oxygen? Should Britons really put aside the climate emergency, the Brexit-induced contraction of the British economy and the worsening condition of the welfare state, to bring a laser-like focus to stopping the small boats? Well, yes. But only if Britain's immigration conversation is a proxy for white racial anxiety about changes to the country's economic model and the consequent impact on Britain's demography. For more than 50 years, the political role of migrants in Britain has been to provide plausible cover for the restructuring of the economy and the planned decimation of welfare services. This is a historical process which has been underway since the oil shock of the 1970s. The financialisation of the British economy began in earnest under Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Her deindustrialisation project was camouflaged by the sale of council housing and other national assets and a savage political war against coal miners. The media, run by international conglomerates, cheered to the rafters this neoliberal experiment and its social consequences. Left-of-centre parties were ruthlessly bullied into jettisoning redistributive taxation plans. Similarly, voters were told to accept near-permanent austerity, the hollowing out of multiple industrial sectors and the withering of the welfare state, as both necessary and inevitable. No pain, no gain was added to the slogan that there is no alternative, as the political anthems of our time. The voters suspected that both were untrue but had been terrified into accepting neoliberal medicine. Then came the global economic meltdown of 2007. International banks declared themselves too big to fail, after frittering away their reserves on wild speculation and Ponzi schemes. Fortunately, the banks' intimate relationships with politicians meant that they could rely on taxpayers' money as an inexhaustible reserve kitty. Yet this cozy arrangement threatened to raze to the ground the political class's claims to democratic accountability, the rule of law and fair play. Politicians were under pressure to explain why the banksters should get public money when this had been denied to coal mines, steel factories, and other ailing industries. As no credible answers were forthcoming, a new and compelling distraction was needed to refocus public attention. Enter migrants. Immigration had been increasing since the 1950s as the British Empire brought surplus labour from its colonial possessions to plug the gaps caused by two devastating world wars. Enoch Powell, who as a minister had encouraged West Indian migration, suffered a Damascene conversion. Powell presented himself as the protector of Albion and conjured a nightmare future in which blacks would have the whip hand over their white neighbours. Powell threatened the economic interests of the nation's elite and was run out of the Conservative Party by its influential business faction. Further measures saw power-like nativists marginalised in the Conservative Party and the National Front infiltrated and destroyed by internecine fighting. Britain's official silence on immigration was then rigorously enforced on both sides of the political divide. The Labour Party went from seeing immigrants as a threat to jobs, to the cold-eyed calculation that increasing diversity was also good for its urban political strategy. By the 1990s, migration patterns had changed, with more Eastern Europeans entering the country after the collapse of communism. They boosted productivity and undermined unionised labour. More importantly, these new immigrants allowed Britain, under a Labour government, to move faster towards new work structures that, it was said, would make the country more competitive. The ground was prepared for the gig economy and flexicurity contracts we have today. By the early 2000s, immigration was the only way the country's political and business decision-makers could compensate for the United Kingdom's aging population and low fertility rate. It was also the inevitable consequence of the climate catastrophe, the wicked trade imbalances with the Global South and the West's military restructuring of Central Asia and the Near East. However, the economic solution presented by immigration caused huge political problems. Ministers dared not explain the country's economic realities. They refused to tell voters in clear terms that migrants were needed as labor in the agriculture, construction, and health and social care sectors. It was impossible for the political class to say that migrants were necessary for their tax revenues and to pay the pensions of the future, because of the political impact of opponent sophistry. Increased immigration required successive governments to plan ahead. They should have authorized massive house building and infrastructure projects across the country. More attention should have been paid to the provision of social housing and education and medical services. The British public should have been told from the very beginning that migrants were crucial to Britain's growth and prosperity. But infrastructure projects and welfare state expansion looked like socialism by the back door to the Conservative and Labour prime ministers who have taken office this century. The inconvenient truths of migration did not sit well with either party. Of course, there were entreaties against racism. Britons were told that diversity was the nation's soft power, but this was sloganeering rather than political education. The hard right filled the vacuum with a racial analysis of the consequences of the country's 50-year experiment with neoliberal economics. It claimed that white natives were being replaced by black and brown people, described as non-elite human capital. The European Union was the engine for this great replacement, and the European Convention on Human Rights was the legal document upon which the project relied. It didn't matter that this explanation was utter nonsense. The narrative's genius was to be found in its sheer simplicity. Voters ate up the racism and looked again at migrants not as fellow victims of neoliberal economics, but as its undeserving beneficiaries. Nigel Farage has built his entire political career on selling this story to gullible Britons. Blaming migrants for the end of the providential state is despicable politics, but it works everywhere it has been tried. Look at France, Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, and Spain. So, the question facing Kemi Badenoch is simple. Is she prepared to tell the British public the truth about immigration? Of course not, because it would mean political oblivion. Nevertheless, Badenoch needs to answer Farage's 10-year plan to oust the Tories as the natural home for Britain's right-wing voters. And she certainly needs an answer to his one-note migration policy that is a little more red-blooded than the unimpressive November statement on immigration numbers. Here's what Badenoch's response might sound like. She could say that she rejected opportunities to stay in Nigeria, or to move to the United States, because she loves and admires the country of her birth and its people. As a successful black Briton, Badenoch can credibly extol the virtues of the country as a beacon of successful integration, without endorsing the more outrageous myths that are designed to soften the hammer blows British colonialism inflicted on its subjects. Badenoch could then caution that this situation will only endure if the British people see fairness in the nation's migration policy. Illegal entry and cheating the system are not the British way, Badenoch could say. This would allow the Tory leader to position herself as a pragmatic migrant patriot. In this vein, Badenoch could argue from the centre instead of the hard right, for an effective and fair migration policy. She could then tack right and embellish her credentials among right-wing voters by taking a strong line on crimes committed by foreigners. The hashtag is already in place. Zero tolerance for foreign criminals remaining in the UK. Badenoch could use an onslaught against criminals as a means of simplifying her immigration policy to distract attention away from Nigel Farage's preferred discussion of numbers. Badenoch could demand the immediate deportation of convicted foreign criminals after their prison sentences are completed. This would amount to stealing the political clothes of the Reform Party, but as Tories love nothing better than law and order posturing, offering a hard line on foreign criminals is a racism-free, voter-friendly pledge. The Conservative leader can hide her support for a business-first migration policy by rooting it in the vocabulary of common sense and human rights. Badenoch could say that the country needs engineers, nurses and teachers and fewer unqualified migrants. In newspaper editorials and big-ticket speeches, Badenoch could identify as her targets the asylum seekers who wish to take advantage of Britain's generosity rather than contribute to its success, and the criminal gangs who assure their voyages to Britain. Badenoch could present immigration as an issue of international law, arguing for the stronger enforcement of agreements with France to stop the boats at source, and a deal with the Republic of Ireland to curb migrant entries into Britain. Badenoch could insist that the claims of asylum seekers be processed more quickly and efficiently. And she could maintain the political pressure on domestic courts' interpretation of the Human Rights Act and propose concentrated dialogue with the European Court in Strasbourg. Badenoch would be well advised to repeat these messages on a listening tour of the United Kingdom, visiting in particular those cities most affected by last summer's race riots. At this stage in the electoral cycle, Badenoch might not want to unveil specific policies that would lead to the regeneration of the likes of Middlesbrough, Manchester, Hartlepool and Rotherham, and so could opt to bash the government for its supposed Westminster Beltway agenda. A new formulation for levelling up needs to be found, so that the Tory leader can sound fresh when talking about urban regeneration. Throw in some old-style social bashing focused on the immigrants' failure to integrate, the scourge of international terror and the hierarchy of cultures, and Badenoch might have enough to keep onside Tory donors and the media. But will this strategy be enough to reel in the Reform Party? Can it help the Conservatives to defeat Labour and the Liberal Democrats in the battleground constituencies? And will it save Badenoch's political skin in this defining year? Find out by staying with our Master's blankets throughout 2025. Please like and share this podcast. Subscribe to this channel for more updates on Kemi Badenoch's leadership of the Conservative Party. Happy New Year to you all. See you next time.